Please describe your priorities for your term in office and your specific qualifications to effectively address those issues.
So I think our top priority right now is dealing with COVID-19, and I think that'll continue in 2021. Hopefully, we'll have a vaccine early in the year, and then it's going to make sure that we can get enough vaccinations produced, make sure we have the right way to distribute them and to who needs them first versus later. But also, it's going to be investing in our infrastructure, helping to create some good-paying jobs while we're recreating our roads and bridges in our schools and broadband systems, water delivery systems, energy grids, etc. So those are all things that are kind of front of mind. And having served on the Appropriations Committee in Congress, that's the kind of work that I do on a regular basis. We have oversight over the various agencies that do things, but also then we pass the actual expenditure of funds for Congress.
What role does federal government play in addressing climate change?
I think government has to. We were part of a Paris climate agreement that I think every country but one might have been a part of. And then unfortunately, Donald Trump took us out of that agreement. You can't really do a climate agreement in that way. To get that much agreement across the entire globe and the planet shows that people understand what 98% of scientists have told us, that the planet is warming, we have climate change, and that if we don't do something, we could kill the planet. And in fact, some people have said we're already at that point of no return. I think there are a lot of things that we can do as a government, including things like auto standards and pollution standards for companies, but also investing and incentivizing people to do things like solar and wind and biomass as energy alternatives. So I think there's a lot of different things that you can see the government get involved in that would put us in the right direction so that we really can have a turnaround on this. I'm always amazed when people say that they don't believe in global warming, because again, 98% of scientists tell us this. And even anecdotal things. I got PolitiFacted, one of those things that politicians never like. They decide if we're saying something correct or not. On when I said in the last 150 years, we've warmed enough in Wisconsin that in Dane County, we have a whole month less of access on our lakes for ice fishing. And it was a true, because that's exactly the science that's out there. We can't continue at this pace, and we have to do something. So I've been a proud supporter of the Green New Deal and supporting many other initiatives to try to address climate change.
What is your position on requiring criminal background checks prior to all gun sales and instituting an extreme risk protection law, known as red flag legislation, which would allow families to petition a court to temporarily remove firearms from loved ones in imminent danger of hurting themselves or others?
Yeah, so we need, the same standards for everyone when you're getting a gun, and that does mean a criminal background check and the ability to make sure that we're keeping guns out of the hands of someone who might, at least based on the information we have, do something wrong with them. Also, the red flag laws, I've been supportive of in Congress as well to address those issues. I just think we're at a point where we have to realize no one is going after your handgun or your hunting rifle in any of this legislation. It's really to try to clean up laws. That the fact that you can go on Craigslist and buy a gun from someone with a bag of cash in the parking lot of a grocery store is not providing the same background support that you have buying it from a legitimate gun store. And we should have some commonality, and however you get a gun should comply with that background check that we want for people who do it from the right ways. So I think there's a lot we can do. And I think government does have a role in this. There's nothing more depressing than after a mass shooting, having a moment of silence in Congress. And then it's not followed by a moment of action. It's just waiting for another mass shooting, and then we have another moment of silence. So I'm ready to take action on this issue.
What, if any, steps would you take to reform current immigration policies?
We've got a pretty broken system from many fronts when it comes to immigration. The good news, I think, is my first term in Congress 4 sessions ago, there was a bill that came out of the Senate that had bipartisan support, I think about 70 votes. That would be a good framework. It had tougher protections at the borders. It had a pathway to citizenship for aspiring Americans. But to ignore the 11 to 13 million people who are currently here undocumented, some who've been here since they've been an infant, is not addressing reality. We really have to have something that comprehensively addresses those folks who are already in the country that we need to address, that addresses issues like DACA for someone who, again, might have been came here at 2 weeks old or 2 months old and may not even know the language of the country they came from. We have to have something that fixes it for folks like that as well. But we also have to make sure our borders have the proper safeguards in place so that we know, when someone is doing something wrong, that's not the path to come into the country, and we can have better standards for that.
Please describe your priorities for your term in office and your specific qualifications to effectively address those issues.
Well, people worry that impeachment, other partisan politics, and name-calling have frayed our civil society, allowing our underlying problems to fester. But I believe that if we work together to solve real problems, our country will begin to heal. I live in Madison, am married, and teach mathematics and statistics. My BA in statistics comes from Princeton University, and my PhD in mathematics from UW-Madison. Going forward, folks are very concerned about healthcare. That certainly came up in terms of the recent diagnosis, treatment, and cure of President Trump for COVID-19. Reform of healthcare is something we're going to need to be considering in the next Congress. But what I would say is that while healthcare is a hard problem, it's not as hard as bringing peace to the Middle East. So I believe that we can, in fact, tackle that. Also, people are concerned about the debt, the deficit that the federal government is accruing, and the debt we're leaving to future generations. One thing that folks have mentioned is perhaps we need to simply cut the size of government because every agency has its own little special interest supporting it. We just do it across the board. My opponent, in fact, has advocated cutting one agency 10%, and I responded, well, let's cut all agencies 10%. That may sound drastic, but I believe that any administrator in a bureaucracy, if told cut your agency by 10%, could do it. And again, the administrator, given you have complete flexibility, you have to continue your mission, but you've got to do it for 10% less. And folks at municipal level, folks at in community access TV, folks at the state level, folks at the federal level, every administrator, I believe, can do that. So I don't think it's an insurmountable or a terrible task to put to the federal bureaucrats to say, okay, shrink your budget 1 year, 10%. You have authority to do what you need to do, but you must continue your mission. Also, people are saying that the government footprint, the regulations that the federal government puts on us are too great. One agency that people have complained to me about is the Federal Department of Education and the rules that it forces on state and local education entities. So that might be an agency that cuts even more than, we cut even more than 10% out of that. So shrinking the federal footprint, shrinking the federal debt, reforming healthcare, all the while reinforcing law and order, because without that, our economy will not recover. And the economic recovery is one of the things that's going to help us reduce the debt, because that will at least maintain the tax revenues that will be needed. The government does not have a revenue problem. The government has a spending problem, which is why forcing the agencies to actually rein in their budgets, I believe, is a viable way. And again, it's something that we can do bipartisanly. We can come together and say, okay, everybody's going to get a cut. Are there any other agencies that you think could be cut even more? We'll talk about that. If an agency is having trouble, we say, all right, how is that going to, what can we do in terms of changing perhaps that agency's directive so that its mission is smaller and hence can fit in a smaller budget? But those are things, again, I think that we can work together, and solving those problems will be more prosperous, and hence and that will improve civility.
What role does federal government play in addressing climate change?
Earlier this year, public health officials used the output of computer programs to drive the debate on COVID-19. But as time went on, those programs reflected reality less and less. Eventually, computer professionals were able to examine those programs and found that they had many bugs. Computer professionals have not been allowed to examine the climate change computer programs. Until they do, there's really no reason to give those programs' results much credence. So much of this debate about global warming is based on, again, the output of computer programs. Until we have confidence that those computer programs are computationally, programmatically sound, and until we have access to the underlying data that's fed into those programs, both of which have been very closely held by the creators, then that's the start of the debate, is show us your work. As an instructor, if a student just tells me, here's my answer at 17, and they don't say how they got it, well, that's not full credit. So how did they get this prediction for temperatures in 100 years, in 200 years, whatever? The other thing I would point out is most folks would be very leery about a weather forecast predicting temperatures for next week. The weather forecast for tomorrow, some local weather forecasters will offer a 4-degree guarantee, plus or minus 4 degrees on tomorrow's high temperature. But they're saying that they can predict the temperature in 100 years, in even more accurately. Again, show your work.
What is your position on requiring criminal background checks prior to all gun sales and instituting an extreme risk protection law, known as red flag legislation, which would allow families to petition a court to temporarily remove firearms from loved ones in imminent danger of hurting themselves or others?
Civilization is a thin skin on molten chaos. As the recent rioting in Madison, Kenosha, Wauwatosa has shown, civilization can tear very quickly and doesn't wait for the bureaucracy, doesn't wait for the police. There you are. So too much of Madison and Dane counties become a shots fired gallery of armed gangs. So whenever an American feels that she feels threatened or wishes to be prepared, she should be able to obtain a firearm that day. Done. She should also be able to buy ammunition, get training, and access facilities. Too often we read in the news of someone who gets a restraining order, and while during the waiting period for a firearm is assaulted or worse. So laws in terms of restricting the ability of an American citizen to purchase a firearm for personal protection, very constitutionally dubious, and as a matter of public safety, also probably ill-considered.
What, if any, steps would you take to reform current immigration policies?
Immigration, it should be illegal immigration, is a portal for narcotics and criminals. Illegal aliens bring in diseases. They distort our economy. They overtax our healthcare system and public services. Americans want illegal immigration ended. We expect our government to finish the border walls and enforce our laws.